Has there ever been another time in human history when it was so obvious what was actually going on, and yet just about every participant in the unfolding events was going to enormous lengths to pretend that it was all something else entirely? Because when it comes to Ukraine, heck, when it comes to Trump's America and the whole of Europe, the mask hasn't slipped, it's been ripped off in a big reveal. And still, the European leaders are pretending it's all still kind of normal. Ukraine's President Zelensky was meeting with the heads of Britain, France and Germany in London yesterday, while President Trump was going on about how he was disappointed that Zelensky had supposedly not read the latest iteration of the American surrender plan. I'm a little bit disappointed that President Zelensky hasn't yet read the proposal. That was as of a few hours ago. His people love it, but he hasn't. Complete nonsense, of course, but the intent is clear. Drive a wedge between the man and his people, and the media, who fall for this every time, went out of their way to talk about how knowledgeable Zelensky actually was when he was asked about the plan. Now, I guess they thought they were pushing back against what Trump had said, as though they don't realise that even discussing the fact that yes, Zelensky is basically competent, as though that was somehow notable, was to frame the discussion in Trump's demeaning, undermining proposition. Like going on about whether Zelensky's wearing a suit or not. Are we discussing a war here, or are we gossiping about trivia? Meanwhile, the United States has released its national security strategy that makes it patently obvious that it's taking Russia's side, as though some of us hadn't noticed that a long time ago. So evident that Russia itself has come out in support of the document, largely consistent with our vision, said Putin's press secretary. And of course it is. The strategy makes it completely evident that Trump's America is an adversary, not only of Ukraine, but of the major European countries as well as the European Union itself. So, yeah, what's not to like if you're Vladimir Putin? Survival lesson number 1. When you are being stalked by a leopard, don't waste time pretending it's probably a cute little tabby cat. One European official said to Politico, therefore, it is important how America will behave, as a mediator, or will it lean towards the Russians? How is that being treated like an open question at this point? Arguably, this is now just becoming farce. So yesterday we saw UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer praising Donald Trump's efforts to end the war in Ukraine. Still, he said this, you can never get from conflict to peace by an easy, straight route. It's always a complicated business. But I do think we're making progress, and I think what President Trump has been able to achieve in the last few weeks, getting it this far, has been the furthest we've got in the 4 years. And I therefore pay tribute to him for that, and hopefully we can make some further progress this afternoon. Seriously, Zelensky must be thinking that Larry, the Downing Street cat, has got more backbone than this lot. But of course Zelensky is still playing exactly the same game, because the European leaders are now his most important genuine allies. So what choice does he have but to play it their way? So he ignored Trump's latest insults, said that elements of the US plan required further discussion on a number of sensitive issues. This, of course, is also nonsense. There was a very long discussion between the Ukrainians and the US in Miami. 3 days of it. The points are not under discussed. If both sides were negotiating in good faith, and there were complicated details about how things would work, well, sure. But we know that's not the case. We know that they know that's not the case, because we had the leak of a transcript of a previous discussion, as we talked about last week, where they discussed how Trump was trying to trap them all. We know specifically that Putin wants the whole of Donbass, including the parts that are strategically, militarily important for Ukraine's defence, that he hasn't been able to capture. It's not complicated. Russia wants that. Ukraine thinks it would be mad to agree to that. After 3 days, they can't get past that. The very basic situation is that Trump has aligned himself with the desired outcomes of Ukraine's enemy. It is trying to find ways to force Zelensky to concede the territory that Putin wants, And that's it. That's the whole of it. Remember, that means that de facto, Trump is aligned with the forces bombing Ukraine and killing its civilians. He is aligned with the conceptual framework that says a major power can walk into a neighbour should it decide to do so. And he's done this because he sees greater benefit for himself and for the United States in normalising relations with Russia, and zero virtue in standing up for the invaded. Again, it's in the security strategy. I mean, not that it needed to be. It has been evident from the first time that Trump boasted he could end the war in 24 hours, because bullying Ukraine to accept Russia's terms was always the only way you could possibly conceive of ever being able to do that. And that is exactly what we're seeing out in the open in the last couple of weeks. Under no circumstances would you expect someone in that position to be treated by either side as a neutral arbiter, as someone who is focused on peace. But here we are, a year later, after that first became clear, and everyone is still pretending, well, maybe it's otherwise. When this period is looked back upon by future historians, it will be fascinating to know how they rationalise and seek to understand the behaviours that we are seeing daily right now. Now that Trump's America is actively working to close the pincer movement around Ukraine to force the outcome, what additional benefits do Ukraine and Europe continue to get from pretending? How much difference would it make now to acknowledge the hostility of America's stance? Arguably none. America has declared that it believes that the European leaders are all bad for their countries. America is going to take it upon itself to organise to see their hard-right populist insurgent parties elected instead, to do to their countries what Donald Trump is currently doing to his. And it put this into writing. It is formal strategy, not just Trump sounding off. They might as well have given that strategy the title, "We are the enemy of Europe. We like dictators, especially powerful and or rich ones." If the Europeans came out and said, enough is enough, the US is not on our side, it is not neutral, we are not aligned, would at least free them up to discuss rationally where the situation is, what they do as a result, to be open about it to their populations, organise according to reality, not fantasy. Now look, I understand it's easy to say. Zelensky, of course, is playing with the most to lose. He not only has to try to navigate his country through this bizarro world that has emerged around its desperate fight for survival, but he has to do so in a way that doesn't make it look like Ukraine unreasonably walked away. Because, of course, Trump is blaming him for everything. He blamed him for supposedly starting the war, which was pretty surreal. He rarely has a cross word about Putin, but he says Zelensky isn't showing respect for not wearing a suit, isn't saying thank you enough, supposedly isn't taking it seriously, which is the implication in saying he hasn't read the plan. All of that is about belittling and demeaning Zelensky, the better to sap Ukraine of its will to resist, the better to divide the opposition so as to conquer it. The Europeans and Zelensky must still believe that if they tell Donald Trump to go take a flying orange jump, this will end up with history concluding it was somehow all their fault. And yeah, we've seen what enthusiastic rewriters of history both Putin's Russia and Trump's America have turned out to be. But there's no point raging at the injustice of it all. You just got to note this moment. The MAGA true believers often go on about something they call Trump derangement syndrome, which used to be a criticism of the mainstream media at a certain point of Trump's original term, but has since become their shorthand way of dismissing any critique whatsoever of their would-be emperor. But you really could say that Trump derangement syndrome is alive and well. It is the perfect phrase to describe the fact that people in positions of supposed leadership are all pretending that Trump might actually be on their side, when it is obvious to everybody it is the exact opposite. That so much of a public discourse about world events is warped by the need to pander to this complete fantasy world based on the opinions and the feelings of the leader of the world. And that's the case to some degree across the whole world. Not always with the same tone, because it's worth noting that for many countries, America losing its mind in this way has not been at all unwelcome. China and Russia, of course, are cautiously delighted. Cautious because they know it's all very volatile, could swing unpredictably. But the goal of speeding up the downfall of the United States as the preeminent global power, yeah, that's definitely something they are well signed up for. Politico carried a column yesterday by journalists who have been attending the Doha Forum, a major international gathering of leaders and diplomats focused on the issues of the moment. No prizes for guessing what got quite a lot of conversation. So what did these assembled dignitaries make of the president, they wondered? Well, one of the common terms used about Trump there was that he was, quote, consequential. Note that isn't a word that denotes good consequences or even necessarily bad consequences, just that he's exercising power in a way that is shaping and influencing events. No doubt about that. Diplomacy being about pragmatism, by and large, various countries are seeing opportunities in that disruption, while others are struggling to come to terms with being under attack from a former ally and all that implies. So several African leaders reportedly were very positive about what it might mean for them when Trump disrupts the global order. They wanted Trump to get more involved in ending conflicts on their continent. They care less about his nasty rhetoric about them, and they know that the truces he's taken credit for so far are actually really rather shaky, not real peace. But nevertheless, if Trump can shake up decades-long enmities by using economic leverage, even if it's a bit of a clown show, might have some positive impacts. Of course, in those conflicts, America actually comes closer to genuinely being a neutral broker, for all that it does so looking at what benefit it can extract from both sides. And some of the African delegates who saw opportunity in Trump's push to do business with Africa. They might not have fully absorbed the one-sided nature of the deals he typically seeks, but all these countries are getting in pretty deep with China. So again, pragmatists, they see some benefit in having competing superpowers, something they can hedge and play off against each other. A number of ministers from the Gulf Arab states were of course similarly thrilled. The economic focus of Trump was bringing lots of opportunities to them, and a rollback of restrictions on fossil fuels, a special status, unlike the Europeans, where Trump actively decries attempts to preach at them on trifling matters such as, corruption, that kind of thing. Yeah, they see plenty of upside in the Trump era. So while most were only willing to be quoted anonymously, they were at least talking relatively frankly about how they were trying to navigate the changing times. Now, there were Europeans there as well, still incapable of doing that. The EU's top diplomat, Kaja Kallas, was parroting the line, "The US is still our biggest ally." And she said this in spite of the fact that it is so obviously not the case. She was actually asked by the moderator of the panel she was on whether Trump now sees Europe as the enemy. Because obviously he does. He says he does. He acts like he does. His people organise as though he does. That Trump derangement syndrome is powerful stuff, though. All the Europeans saying what they think they have to say, in spite of the obvious falsehood in every word. The public of their countries having to actively read between the lines, try to puzzle out what's really going on for themselves. That's assuming they don't just shrug their shoulders and give up trying, as many must surely do. And all the while the mainstream media, who should be telling the real story behind the fakery, instead spends its time debating whether Zelensky really should be wearing a suit, and does he really know what's going on with his own peace process. At least the Washington Post did, right at the end of an article today, finally quote one voice saying it straight. The EU's former top diplomat, Josep Borrell, called the US strategy a declaration of political war, and he called on European leaders to stop pretending that Trump is not our adversary, hiding behind a fearful and complacent silence, and instead assert the EU's sovereignty. It's the first time I've heard anyone but me use the classification of Trump as an adversary of Europe. It should be everywhere. I mean, look, maybe not uncontested, there's debate, but the fact you have to come to this channel or to ex-diplomats who get hidden in the very last paragraph of a long article, it is just mind-boggling. Meanwhile, Ukraine fights for its survival. We all fight over what sort of world we think should and can come out of this period of vigorous destruction of the existing order. And we look forward to the time when we can look back again at this moment, amazed as we will be at just how stupid the world became for a short while.